The sun was barely rising over the red hills when Dina began her morning ritual. She woke alone, as always, in the small clay hut built by her late grandmother at the very edge of the village, just beyond the line where the goats were tethered and the air thickened with smoke from the cow dung fires. Her hands, rough and blackened with soot, worked quickly as she gathered dried dung patties into a cracked gourd bowl. The smoke huts, where dung was dried and burned to make fuel, had become her home. No one else lived near them. No one else wanted to. Dina's smell preceded her wherever she went. The tang of smoke clung to her clothes, her hair, her skin, thick and sour like burnt earth. Even when she bathed in the river, even when she rubbed crushed leaves behind her ears or hung wild mint around her neck, it returned. The smell had settled into her bones, into her very breath. The other children caught the scent before they saw her and announced her presence with shrieks and laughter. "Dung girl! Dung girl, coming down the path! Smoke girl! Did your skin catch fire in your sleep?" They laughed with mouths full of millet and teeth like jagged stones. Dina said nothing. She walked with her head down, arms cradling the dung patties as though they were something precious. She kept to the sides of paths, stepping into thorny grass when others passed. Even the elders turned their faces as she went by. The stink, they said, was too much. A child without parents, living among fires and feces, what good could come of her? But Dina kept going. She sold her dung patties for coins, small, cold copper discs that she hid in a broken clay pot beneath her sleeping mat. Every evening, she counted them by candlelight and whispered her grandmother's lullaby, the one she'd sung in the last days before she died, her voice hoarse with fever. Covered in the earth, broken and bent. She walked with shame, but never spent. The soil heard her, the roots replied. An arm arose where tears had dried. Dina didn't know who the lullaby was about. She only knew that her grandmother had sung it like a prayer. A hope. A secret passed from one woman to another in a world that didn't care to listen. When the nights were cold and lonely, Dina repeated it to herself until she dreamed of standing tall in golden light, wrapped not in rags and smoke, but in something strong, something sacred. But morning always came, and with it, the cruelty of the living. No one was more cruel than Prince Damba. He was the chief's only son, tall, broad-shouldered, with skin the color of polished mahogany and eyes sharp as flint. The girls adored him. The boys feared him. The elders whispered that he was destined to rule not only their village, but the surrounding lands too. Damba walked like the earth belonged to him, and maybe it did. The soil seemed to harden beneath his feet. The birds paused in the trees when he passed. Dina avoided him whenever she could. But the prince had a nose for weakness, and she had become his favorite target. It started with small things, mocking her as she walked by the river, flicking pebbles at her back during morning markets, spitting near her feet and laughing. But then came the day at the village well. Dina had waited patiently, as always, at the very back of the long line of women and girls fetching water. She kept her eyes low, her jug in hand. She knew her place. But Damba had come striding through the crowd with his entourage of friends and loyal cousins, swaggering with that familiar arrogance. When he saw Dina, he grinned. "Well, if it isn't the dung collector," he said loudly. "Tell me, girl, does the well water hiss when it touches your skin?" A ripple of laughter followed. Dina remained silent. She did not look up. That made it worse. Damba grabbed her jug and tipped it sideways, spilling the water she had fetched. She blinked but said nothing. "She must think she's better than us," Damba said, circling her like a predator. "Silent little dung girl, walking through the village like she's not stinking up the whole place." "She doesn't speak because she's cursed," someone said. "She doesn't speak because even her own mouth can't stand the smell of her," another chimed in. The laughter turned into a storm. Dina stood still as rain. But inside her, something coiled. Not rage. Not yet. Something quieter. Older. Her grandmother's lullaby played again, low and deep like a drum buried underground. Covered in the earth, broken and bent. Damba stepped closer and tapped her forehead with his finger. "Why don't you wash that curse off your skin, dumb girl," he said. "Or maybe you think you're some kind of queen under all that filth." She looked at him then. Just for a second. Her eyes were dry. Empty. He flinched. Only slightly. Only for a second. But she saw it. That night, as she lay beneath her thin blanket of woven reeds, Dina whispered the lullaby again. This time, she didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She simply stared at the cracked ceiling of her hut and repeated the words like a promise. The soil heard her, the roots replied. She didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But she believed in it. Believed that someday, somehow, the earth would answer. The festival of cleansing arrived with drums and color, dust clouds and sacred chants, a celebration meant to purify the village and cast out misfortune. It was a time of laughter and fire, of circle dances and blessings from the elders. But beneath the joyous mask of tradition, the festival carried a darker ritual, one known quietly among the villagers as the choosing. Each year, someone was named the unclean one, a person believed to carry the village's sins, shame, or bad fortune. The chosen would be mocked, symbolically shamed, and humiliated before the gods as a sacrifice of pride, to cleanse the community of its filth. No one wanted to be chosen. And yet, everyone had someone in mind they hoped would be. This year, it was Dina. It was always a possibility, but never before had they gone so far. The elders never selected children or orphans in the past, but Prince Damba had spoken. He stood before the crowd days before the festival, in the center of the village square, robes flowing and arms wide. This year, we honor the earth by confronting its dirtiest gift to us. We give thanks for fire and ash, but we must cast out what clings too long. The villagers murmured. He smiled coldly. We name the girl of smoke. The girl of dung. The silent stink among us, Dina. Dina was nearby, carrying a bundle of dried dung on her back. She heard it all. She didn't flinch. Not even when the murmurs turned to cheers and chants. She was no stranger to shame. She will walk into the sacred circle, Damba declared, raising his voice so even the wind seemed to hush. And she will stand there, if she dares. Because only a queen could face the gods without shame. The challenge echoed across the land. Only a queen. The next day came in a storm of preparation. Women painted white ash on their cheeks and wrapped their waists with colored beads. Men sharpened drums and tied sacred leaves around their ankles. The elders blessed the ground with water, and the children practiced dances barefoot in the dust. And Dina? She prepared in silence. She washed her hair. She brushed it for the first time in weeks. She scrubbed her arms and legs with sand and river stones. Not to remove the smell, she knew it could not be undone, but to feel the sensation of being touched by something other than mockery. She unwrapped the bundle her grandmother had left long ago, an old cloth, almost falling apart, embroidered with curling brown patterns like roots and waves. She tied it around her waist. When she arrived at the festival grounds, a path cleared through the crowd, not out of reverence, but revulsion. Children whispered. Adults smirked. Even the drummers hesitated before striking the first beat, unsure if it was truly safe to let her near the sacred circle. But Prince Damba stood proudly at the edge of the ring, arms crossed, waiting. You came, he said with theatrical surprise. You heard the dare, and you actually came. Dina nodded once. He chuckled, then turned to the crowd. Let the gods bear witness. Two men stepped forward, carrying a wide wooden bowl filled with fresh, wet cow dung, so green and thick it steamed in the morning sun. Flies buzzed eagerly above it. The stench rippled out like a living thing. The crowd leaned forward. Step into the circle, Damba commanded, eyes glittering. Dina stepped in. The circle was old, so old that no one remembered who had first carved it into the ground. Its border was marked with stones etched in symbols most had forgotten. The air above it shimmered faintly, even when there was no heat. Elders said the earth listened here. That what was said or done within the ring reached deeper than mere soil. Dina stood in the center. The drumming stopped. The crowd waited. Prince Damba raised a hand. "Now," he said. "Let her wear her truth." The young men approached with handfuls of dung. They smeared it on her shoulders, her arms, her back. They pressed it into her hair, slapped it onto her face. One knelt and smeared it up her legs. Another painted a crude mask across her chest. Still, Dina did not move. The crowd erupted into laughter. "Look at her. She's a statue of stink. She belongs to the flies now." But inside the circle, something else was stirring. As the dung settled onto her skin, as it dried in the heat and hardened into a second shell, the air around her thickened. The earth beneath her bare feet pulsed once, gently, like a heartbeat. No one noticed at first. The drumming resumed. The laughter swelled. Prince Damba smirked with satisfaction. But a few of the elders shifted uncomfortably. A chill passed through their spines that had nothing to do with weather. One of them, old Nala, narrowed her eyes. "The girl is not weeping," she murmured. "She should be," said another. Old Nala shook her head slowly. "She is not afraid." Within the circle, Dina's eyes were closed. The dung was crusting, forming layers that cracked and thickened. Her arms, once trembling, now felt steady. Her back straightened. The more they laughed, the stiller she became. She was listening, not to them, but to something deeper. Something far below the surface. The lullaby whispered inside her. Covered in the earth, broken and bent. And the sacred ground, long ignored, long abused, began to listen back. The cracks in the soil at her feet widened, though there had been no rain. The stones around the circle darkened. A low hum vibrated beneath her soles, almost like the voice of her grandmother rising through the dust. The villagers didn't see it. Not yet. They only saw a girl covered in filth, standing still as a tree. But the ground knew. And it had begun to respond. The sun had long reached its peak, scorching the sacred grounds with a merciless heat that shimmered above the soil like waves. Still, Dina did not move. The laughter had died hours ago. The crowd had grown bored, trickling away to find shade, food, and gossip. Even Prince Damba had turned his back, waving the final insult over his shoulder, "Stand there forever, dung queen." And so she did. The cow dung baked on her skin, stiffening into a cracked shell. Flies landed, buzzed, and left again, unsettled by the strange hum beneath the surface. The air above her shimmered not just from heat now, but from something older, deeper, vibrating just beyond the visible. Beneath the hardened crust, her skin tingled. She could feel movement, not of her muscles, but of energy flowing under her flesh, up her spine, into her skull. The voice she'd heard as a child in dreams, the one she thought was her grandmother's lullaby, returned now with clarity. It was not one voice, but many, layered, rising like waves, whispering from inside the armor forming on her skin. "You are not alone." The hardened dung was no longer dung. It was merging with the earth, bonding with the herbs scattered on the sacred ground, roots, ash, clay, all drawn together by an ancient will. The heat of the sun had baked the outer layer into something dense, brittle at the surface, but strong beneath. Cracks ran across her shoulder, revealing a strange, dark gold shimmer. She tried to lift her arm. It obeyed. Her joints moved with a creak, like tree branches in the wind. Her breathing deepened. She had become heavier, but not with burden. With presence. In her mind's eye, images flashed, women standing in circles, smeared in mud and singing in low tones, arms raised to the moon. Warriors cloaked in bark and stone, walking without fear through fire. Faces both familiar and strange, all marked with the same patterns, spirals, roots, waves. "You are of the earth. Let the armor remember." Dina's heartbeat slowed. She was no longer simply a girl. She was becoming a vessel, shaped by shame but solidified by something older, something sacred. Her eyes opened. The sun was beginning to fall. The festival grounds were nearly empty. Only a few children played in the distance, chasing shadows with sticks. A young girl spotted her and froze. She pointed. "Mama, she's still there." Voices called out from huts. "Leave the cursed girl alone. Don't go near her. She's not right in the head." But curiosity grew. By evening, a small crowd gathered again, whispers and gasps among them. Dina had not moved for hours, yet now she stood taller than before. Her silhouette looked almost carved. The dried dung on her shoulders had flaked off in places, revealing what lay underneath, something not of flesh. Something like armor. The surface gleamed faintly in the fading light, a dull bronze hue with veins of black and gold running through it, as if the sacred ground itself had risen to cover her. Her fingers were wrapped in bark-like skin. Her legs looked planted, strong as tree trunks. Where her chest had once been smeared with shame, now stood a hardened spiral pattern glowing faintly. In her eyes, they were no longer brown. They were glowing, subtly, like coals under ash. She looked up at the crowd. No expression on her face. No words from her lips. Then, without a sound, she stepped forward. The villagers stepped back in unison. Her footsteps echoed too loud for the soft earth. The dust beneath her feet scattered away in a ripple. Each movement seemed deliberate, as though time itself paused to allow her passage. "She's cursed," someone whispered. "No," another replied. "She's become something else. She's not human." They didn't stop her. They didn't dare. Prince Damba, who had returned just in time to see the commotion, pushed through the crowd with a scowl. "What is this foolishness now?" he barked. The villagers pointed. The crowd parted, and he laid eyes on her, Dina, the orphan girl he had humiliated, now walking past him with the gait of a queen and the silence of a storm. For a moment, he forgot to breathe. What is this?" he muttered. "Some trick?" Dina didn't respond. She didn't even look at him. He stepped into her path, holding up a hand. "Stop. I command you." She stopped. Not out of obedience, but because she chose to. Slowly, her gaze met his. Her eyes burned gold. Prince Damba recoiled. The power around her seemed to hum louder when challenged, like the earth holding its breath. She tilted her head, not in fear, but in curiosity, as if wondering how he had ever appeared powerful to her. The same boy who had thrown dung with laughter now stood trembling like a leaf before a coming storm. Then she stepped past him. The air behind her rippled as if something followed, something invisible and vast. The crowd remained silent long after she disappeared down the hill toward her hut by the smoke huts, not a single voice daring to laugh. That night, the village could not sleep. Stories spread like wildfire. Children whispered of the dung girl who became a statue of earth. Elders debated old myths about women who once wore the land as protection. Some claimed she had been chosen by forgotten gods. Others said she had died in the sacred circle, and something else had taken her place. Prince Damba sat alone in his hut, sweat beading on his brow, his pride gnawed away by fear. He stared at the flame in his lantern, watching it flicker without breeze. He had wanted to shame her. But now, her silence haunted him. He'd made her stand in dung. And somehow, she had become something far stronger than shame. The girl who once smelled of smoke had returned, armored, glowing, and silent. And the village was afraid. The rains had failed 3 moons in a row. By day, the fields cracked like broken skin. By night, the cries of livestock echoed hollow through the hills. Goats birthed still, hens stopped laying, and the river, once proud and silver, shrank to a muddy trickle between stones. The villagers whispered behind closed doors and peered toward the hills where Dina had vanished, unsure if they had cursed her or been cursed by her absence. None dared speak her name aloud anymore. They called her the Armored Girl or the Earth Walker in hushed tones, eyes darting to the forest line as if it could hear. She was shamed, some said. She was chosen, others muttered. Chief Baraka, growing gaunt with sleeplessness, summoned the elders to the fire pit. His own wife had begun coughing blood, their crops of millet and yam had shriveled to nothing. The priest claimed the spirits were angry, yet his offerings had burned black with no wind to stir the smoke. Finally, it was the chief's advisor who said what all feared. It began after the festival of cleansing. After the dung was thrown. She left of her own will. Prince Damba snapped from the shadows, his voice bitter and brittle. She's not a spirit, she's a girl who was shamed and ran. The old woman beside him squinted into the fire. And yet the girl became stone, Damba. Your voice trembled when she passed you. As it does now. Silence. At last, the chief rose. We must find her. Bring her back before this land turns to ash beneath our feet. He sent 6 strong men into the hills with dried meat and cowrie beads, peace offerings. They returned empty-handed, spooked by strange tracks in the mud that resembled footprints and roots combined. One man swore he heard a woman's voice humming under the soil. Then came the thunderstorm. It rolled over the village like a beast long slumbering, shaking rooftops and splitting trees with furious cracks. The sky opened its mouth and roared, and all doors were shut. Flames blew out. Rain poured in great slaps, heavy and unrelenting, as if the heavens had finally wept. And in that storm, she returned. She did not walk with urgency or fear. She stepped into the village as though it were her birthright, each footfall silent despite the mud. The villagers, drawn by a strange pull, peeked from behind curtains and lifted thatched door flaps. One by one, they emerged into the downpour. Dina stood in the center of the square. Rain struck her, but did not drench her. The water steamed off her form as though touching something not entirely of this world. She had changed. The armor no longer sat on her like a covering. It had become her. Her skin was bark and bronze, jointed with dark earth and seams that flexed as she breathed. Spirals now bloomed across her shoulders and throat, glowing faintly, pulsing with life. Vines wove into her hair like braids, some still flowering despite the weather. She opened her mouth, and though her lips moved, what came out was not just sound. It was wind. Her voice creaked like trees and rustled like leaves. It echoed like a breeze through dry grass, yet every word carried weight. I have returned. No one moved. No one dared. Prince Damba burst from his father's hut, disheveled and pale, sword clutched in shaking hands. Arrest her, he bellowed. This creature is not of our land. She brings ruin. The guards around the square looked to each other. No one stepped forward. I said arrest her. Damba shrieked again, rain slapping his face, eyes wild. Still, none obeyed. A boy at the edge of the square whispered, she's not a creature. She's a queen. And then she turned her head. Her gaze found Damba. The prince staggered, all color fleeing his cheeks. Her golden eyes glowed brighter now, molten and ancient. You called me unclean, she said, voice like a forest after fire. He lifted his sword with both hands, shaking. But the earth calls me queen. Lightning split the sky. A boom shook the ground. And in that white flash, she stepped closer. Damba screamed, not in pain, for she had not touched him, but in fear, deep and choking. He dropped the sword. Fell to his knees in the mud. Whimpered like a beaten child. The people did not pity him. They watched as Dina stood tall, silent, glowing in the storm. One of the elders stepped forward, hands open in reverence. Forgive us, she said softly. We did not see who you truly were. Dina did not respond. She lifted her head to the sky and closed her eyes. The rain slowed. As the storm faded to drizzle, the air grew warm again. The clouds parted, revealing stars. Somewhere beyond the hills, a wolf howled once, and was answered by the rustle of wind through leaves. And then, a single goat bleated nearby. A newborn one. The people gasped. By morning, the earth would soften. Shoots of green would rise from cracks long barren. But none of them would sleep that night. They would gather around fires and tell their children how shame became strength, how the earth remembers who it loves. And how Dina, the girl once covered in dung, returned not as a curse, but as the balance the village had broken. A queen, not by blood, but by soil. The morning after Dina's return dawned golden and strange. The ground smelled of wet life, like roots stretching and seeds yawning awake. Trees that had stood brittle for weeks now shimmered with dew-soaked leaves. Goats that had grown thin and listless bleated with new energy. Even the wind, once still and dry, now carried the scent of growing things. But not all welcomed the change. Prince Damba stood at the edge of the square, watching from the shadows as villagers quietly dropped gourds of milk and garlands of herbs at the base of the old tree where Dina sat each morning. She did not speak unless spoken to, but her presence had become a gravity no one could resist. Even the children, especially the children, gathered around her like bees to honey. They sat cross-legged in the dust, eyes wide, as she taught them the lullaby once whispered to her by her grandmother. It was not just a song, it was an invocation. A remembering. The armor of the earth, she would say softly, her voice half human, half wind, is not worn. It is awakened. When she sang, vines trembled. Soil hummed. Even the fire pits burned cleaner. Damba watched it all with bitter bile pooling in his chest. He could not sleep. He could not eat without tasting shame. The people no longer bowed when he passed. His friends, those who had laughed loudest at the festival of cleansing, now avoided his eyes. His father, the chief, had grown quiet and contemplative, consulting the earth priest more than his own son. So Damba did what bitter men do when they feel power slip from their grasp, he lashed out. It happened on a day when the sky was soft and windless, when Dina sat beneath the baobab tree, her fingers buried in the soil, the village children humming softly around her. Damba strode into the square in full ceremonial garb, gold rings glinting on his arms, feathers trembling from his headdress. A small drumbeat followed him, his remaining loyalists trying to summon a past that no longer lived. People of this village, he shouted. Have you all gone mad? Worshipping a girl who stinks of dung and dirt? The children stopped humming. Dina opened her eyes. Damba's voice grew sharper, louder. She has poisoned your minds with tricks. Parlor games. She is no queen. She is a scar. He stepped forward, closer to her circle. You want the earth? Then eat it, dumb girl. He grabbed a handful of dry soil and hurled it toward her face. It never reached her. The ground between them cracked with a sudden thunderclap. A green shoot exploded upward, then twisted and coiled into a thick vine, rising like a serpent. It caught the soil midair, crumbled it, and hissed. More vines burst from the ground. From the tree behind her, branches reached downward, curving like arms. Birds screamed into flight. A low rumble echoed through the village, beneath it, around it, as though something ancient stirred in its sleep. Dina rose slowly, her hands still half buried in the soil. She didn't speak. She simply raised her arm. The earth answered. A tremor rolled through the square, knocking pots off porches and shaking the chief's hut. Cracks webbed across the ground beneath Damba's feet. From those cracks, roots curled and rose, wrapping around his ankles like question marks. He tried to run. The roots tightened. Thunder boomed again. Not from the sky, but from the earth itself. Then silence. Dina stepped toward him. With each step, the vines retreated, slinking back into soil like obedient children. Damba fell to his knees, panting, afraid to look up. She knelt, level with him, and placed her hand on the ground. No one, she said, voice soft and deadly, will ever touch me again. He trembled. Behind him, his few loyal men vanished into the wind. She stood. The animals returned first, curious goats, wild dogs with tails wagging low. Then the children crept forward, wrapping their fingers around her armored skirt, eyes wide not with fear but awe. From the rooftops, women began humming her lullaby. By nightfall, the village square had transformed into something sacred. And Prince Damba was alone. His words no longer mattered. His name, once shouted in praise, now echoed in shame. Dina did not seek revenge. She simply stayed. Like a mountain. Like a truth too long buried. The villagers began to leave small offerings at the base of her tree, stones from their fields, feathers from their chickens, bits of honeycomb. They did not call her queen, for that would be too small a word. They called her the earth's chosen, and they came to her not with problems, but with questions. Why won't our seeds grow? What did I dream of the river? Can you teach my child the song? And Dina taught them, not with commands but with presence. She showed them how to listen to the ground before planting. How to hum to the trees before cutting them. How to thank the wind before asking it to carry prayers. The children learned quickly. Their parents watched with wide, wondering eyes. The earth bloomed. Damba, meanwhile, was left to walk alone. The throne meant for him sat empty. His father, broken with guilt, spent his days in silence beside the fire. The chief's hut grew dark. But Dina's tree never did. At night, its branches glowed faintly with bioluminescent moss. No one knew how it got there. Fireflies swirled like tiny stars, and the lullaby of the armor of the earth filled the air, even when no one sang it. And in the stillness of that sacred night, even the earth seemed to breathe easier. The sun had barely touched the horizon when the whisper reached Prince Damba's ears, a whisper thick with deceit and desperation. They say, muttered one of his last loyal spies, that the armor can be cracked. That if broken, her power will crumble with it. It's just clay and dung, hardened by sun and superstition. Damba leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Are you certain? As certain as stories can be, the man shrugged, but others say it came from the earth itself, that the armor is alive. Damba waved him off. His pride, still bruised from humiliation after humiliation, refused to consider the idea of a living armor. He chose instead to believe the lie he needed most, that she was only a girl in a shell of hardened waste. He decided it would end that night. Damba sent quiet messages to warriors from neighboring tribes, mercenaries with no loyalty to the earth, no reverence for sacred grounds. He promised gold, land, wives. He promised glory. 6 came, cloaked in bone and iron, scarred and brutal. They laughed when they heard their target was a girl who once smelled of dung. She wears a shell, Damba said, but inside, she is still just a frightened girl. They gathered near midnight, shadows among shadows, beneath the very hill where Dina slept beneath the baobab tree. The village slept below, wrapped in warmth and peace. But up in the hills, the wind had gone still, as if it held its breath. Damba crouched behind a rock, eyes wild, heart hammering. He wore no royal garb now, just plain leather and a dagger in each hand. This was not a prince's act. This was the act of a man clawing at the last threads of control. The warriors circled her. She did not wake. Or at least, she did not open her eyes. Her body glowed faintly under the moonlight, the armor glinting like stone bathed in moon water. Moss curled around her limbs. Small birds slept in the folds of her hardened skirt. A line of ants marched peacefully across her shoulder. The first warrior stepped forward and swung his axe. It struck her chest. Clang. The sound rang out like a bell. The axe head snapped off, shattering into a dozen pieces that scattered across the grass. One shard vibrated, shimmered, and then began to move. Tiny legs unfurled from its edges. Then wings. A beetle. The other shards followed. Each piece became a crawling, twitching insect. Damba's eyes widened as they turned, not toward Dina, but toward him. No, 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 he whispered, stumbling back. The beetles swarmed him. They slid under his tunic, under his sleeves, into his boots. He screamed, slapping at his body, writhing in the dirt. The warriors, now pale and wide-eyed, hesitated. The second man raised a spear and lunged. The point connected with Dina's shoulder and snapped in half. The splintered wood turned to ash in his hands. The third tried to swing a chain, hoping to bind her. But as it wrapped around her arm, it rusted instantly, crumbling into dust before it hit the ground. The others fled. Only Damba remained, shrieking and tearing off his clothes, beetles spilling from his sleeves, crawling across his back, into his mouth. He spat and screamed and fled naked into the hills, howling like a child left in the dark. His cries echoed until they dissolved into nothing but the wind. Dina never moved. Not once. She remained seated beneath her tree, eyes closed, arms folded peacefully in her lap. Only when the last insect disappeared into the soil did she speak. "I do not strike," she said softly. "I reflect." And the words carried, not just to the remaining warriors, not just to the village below, but to the trees, the rivers, and the stones. It was as if the land itself carried her truth on its breath. The villagers awoke to find Damba's dagger stuck in the sacred tree, bent in half. They found clawed footprints and broken chains, but no sign of Dina's attackers. By morning, word had spread. By nightfall, other villages whispered her name. The woman of earth. The girl of living armor. The one who reflects. People began to travel from distant lands to leave offerings at the base of her hill. They brought clay figurines, songs, and dreams. They begged for her protection, not from enemies, but from themselves. From greed. From war. From forgetting. And Dina remained the same. Still. Unmoved. Peaceful. A mirror for the world's violence, refusing to throw it back. The old women said, "She is what we become when we endure long enough to become stone." The young girls said, "She is what we might become, if we remember our names." And Prince Damba? Some say he roams the hills still, naked and muttering, swatting at invisible beetles. Others say he crossed into the forest where men become animals. Others believe he was swallowed by the earth, digested slowly in the roots of the very tree he once tried to use for shame. But none truly know. Because no one ever looked for him. Not after that night. Not after the earth made its choice. At first, they came timidly, young girls with downcast eyes, soot on their cheeks, and shame stitched into their shoulders. They traveled from beyond the forest, across rivers, and over hills, each drawn not by gold or fame, but by a tale told in hushes, a girl who had been covered in dung and had risen like a mountain. They came seeking the Dung Queen. Dina, still seated often beneath her tree or walking silently through the village, received them with quiet eyes. She spoke little, but when she did, her words settled in the air like seeds, waiting to root. "You carry shame like ash on your skin," she told one girl, whose father had sold her as a bride and then banished her when she fled. "But ash comes from fire. And fire comes from strength." To another, marked by the village as cursed after she survived a lightning strike, she said, "The sky touched you. That is not a curse. That is a claim." Soon, girls began to stay. The villagers, at first weary, began to accept their presence. The same square where Dina had once been humiliated now held circles of song and quiet meditation. Girls walked barefoot across sacred earth, eyes closed, arms open to the wind. Some built shrines of dried cow dung, decorating them with feathers and beads. One by one, the villagers shifted. It was not instant, and it was not perfect, but it was real. The mockery turned into music. The taunts became teachings. The children who once called her dung girl now danced around her hut singing, "Queen of soil, queen of stone, queen who made the shame her throne." Her hut was not built by her hands, but by the same villagers who once threw dung at her body. Each person offered a piece of themselves, a carved beam, a woven mat, a clay pot. They placed it in the exact center of the village square, beneath the oldest tree. No one dared touch it uninvited. No one dared spit or whisper or even raise their voice near it. It had become a sacred space, not by fear, but by awe. Inside, the air smelled of herbs, smoke, and rain-drenched earth. Dina sat cross-legged before a basin of soil, always listening, always waiting. She did not demand followers. She did not perform miracles. But her stillness was a sermon, and her presence, a power. And then, on a day when the clouds hung low like sagging curtains, he returned. Prince Damba. He was barely a shadow of the boy who had once stood atop drums and laughed as she was smeared with filth. His cheeks were hollow. His hair was matted. His clothes hung loose around a body stripped of arrogance. He limped into the square alone. Children stopped playing. Women froze at their chores. The air thickened. Damba dropped to his knees before Dina's hut, trembling. His voice cracked like a dry branch. "I was wrong," he said. I was broken inside. I wanted to break others to hide it. I thought your silence was weakness. I thought your dirt was shame." Dina appeared at the doorway. She stepped slowly, as if each motion was in conversation with the ground. Her armor was still there, fused with her skin, softened in places by moss and flowered vines. Her eyes met his, and held. "I have walked far," he whispered. "But none of the roads led to peace." She said nothing. "I don't want to be king. I don't want power. I just want to be forgiven." Still, she did not speak. Instead, she knelt. She placed one hand on the soil. The ground around Damba began to hum, a deep, ancient murmur. Tiny cracks webbed out from beneath him. Dust rose like breath. He gasped, afraid. But Dina looked not at him, but at the earth. And softly, gently, she whispered, "Do not punish him. Let him face himself." The ground split, not wide, not deep. Just a fissure. Just enough. Damba tumbled forward, landing on his stomach. The villagers rushed to help, but Dina raised her hand. Not in violence, only in stillness. Damba crawled out slowly, his hands covered in dirt, his face streaked with tears. He had not been swallowed whole. Only his pride had. He sat back on the edge of the cracked earth, breathing hard. And for the first time in his life, he bowed, not just his head, but his heart. And Dina turned away. Not in rejection, but in release. She had given him what the earth had given her, a chance to be shaped, not shattered. From that day forward, the girls called her not just Queen of Dung, but Queen of Transformation. And even the wind seemed to whisper her song. The years had carved their quiet passage across the village, tracing lines in the soil and wrinkles upon the faces of those who had once stood as children beneath Dina's gaze. The seasons had shifted, rains had come and gone, and the world itself seemed to have bent to the memory of the girl who once smelled of smoke and dung, but who had become something more. Dina was old now. Her hair, once dark and wild like the night wind, had softened to silver threads, tangled gently like the roots of the ancient baobab. Her eyes, still sharp and filled with a quiet fire, reflected the many moons she had lived beneath the sky's vast expanse. Her armor, once a hardened shell of earth and dung that had turned heads and hearts with its strange power, had begun to crack. Not in anger or pain, but like the earth itself releasing a long-held breath. Fine fractures spidered across the clay, and small flakes drifted away like forgotten memories on the wind. The villagers watched in silence. They knew this day would come. They had been waiting for it, in a way, as one might wait for a sacred river to swell, or a flower to bloom after winter's long sleep. Dina sat beneath her favorite tree in the village square, the one whose roots whispered secrets only she could understand. Her hands rested lightly on her knees, her breath slow and steady. For the first time in many years, she reached up and touched the helmet that had become part of her legend. With a gentle sigh, she lifted it away from her head. Her skin gleamed beneath the fading dusk light, radiant with a vitality that belied her years. It was skin touched not by shame, but by the sun, the rain, and the earth itself. A soft smile curved her lips, a smile of release, of knowing, of peace. "It was never about the dung," she said softly, her voice carrying across the quiet square. "It was about what we bury, and what rises from it." The crowd, gathered in reverent stillness, felt the weight of her words settle deep into their bones. Children perched on the shoulders of elders, eyes wide with wonder. Even the old men, weathered and gruff, nodded as if hearing the truth for the first time. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village, Dina closed her eyes. Her breath slowed, each inhale a whisper, each exhale a farewell. When she opened them again, it was to a world that shimmered with promise. She leaned back, and the earth beneath her seemed to pulse gently, as if greeting an old friend. Then, with the grace of falling leaves, her body began to dissolve, not into dust, but into soil rich with life. The villagers watched, tears streaming down faces etched with love and loss, as her form melted into the ground beneath the tree. From that sacred earth, a strange new life emerged, a tree unlike any they had seen before. Its bark was tough and glimmered like the armor that had once shielded her. Its branches reached skyward, strong and proud. Golden sap oozed slowly from its wounds, catching the light like liquid sunshine. The children named it the Armor Tree. It grew tall and wide, a living monument to a girl who had been scorned and shamed, and who had risen to become their queen. At night, when the stars blanketed the sky and the village slept, the children would gather beneath the Armor Tree. They would lie on the soft grass, eyes closed, and drift into dreams where a girl stood tall against the world, silent, strong, and shining with an armor not made of earth or dung, but of spirit. They dreamed of her walking through fire and rain, of her voice rising like thunder, and of the earth itself singing in her name. And as they dreamed, the Armor Tree whispered back, its golden sap glowing faintly in the moonlight, a promise that shame could be transformed, that wounds could become strength, and that even the most broken among them could one day stand crowned by the earth. The legend of Dina, the girl who smelled of smoke, who wore armor born of dung and earth, who faced humiliation and rose beyond it, lived on. Not just in stories, but in the soil beneath their feet, in the breath of the wind, and in the hearts of all who dared to believe in the power of transformation. And so, the village thrived, forever changed by the Armor Queen who taught them that sometimes, the greatest strength comes not from what we wear, but from what we choose to become.